Welcome to Tasai. You're passionate about space, exploration, and the mysteries of the universe. You're in the right place. Join me on this incredible journey as we dive deep into the cosmos, uncovering secrets of the stars, planets, and everything in between. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an adventure. Let's explore the universe together. Dr. Aisha sat at her desk, her fingers tracing the edges of an old leather-bound diary she had found in the archives of the Space Research Center. The yellowed pages smelled of time, filled with handwritten notes from a scientist long forgotten. As she flipped through the diary, her heart raced at the mention of a deep space signal received 50 years ago, a signal so strange it had defied all attempts at decoding. The entries hinted at something extraordinary, a distant star system, a potential home to an ancient civilization. But one line stood out, written in bold, trembling handwriting. "Do not awaken them." Aisha's curiosity burned brighter than her caution, and she dismissed the warning as the ramblings of a paranoid scientist. For her, this was the breakthrough she had been waiting for, a chance to finally prove that humanity was not alone in the universe. Determined to uncover the truth, Aisha pored over every detail in the diary. The coordinates scribbled in the margins led to a star system that had never been officially explored. She spent nights analyzing the faint traces of the signal, her mind consumed by its complexity. It wasn't just noise, it was a structured message, a calling from the unknown. Her obsession grew, and soon she brought the discovery to her colleagues, painting a picture of scientific glory and the unparalleled significance of their findings. Aisha's passion was infectious, and within weeks, a specialized team of researchers, engineers, and astronauts was assembled, all eager to embark on this historic mission. The preparations for the mission were meticulous. Advanced spacecraft, outfitted with the latest technology, was constructed to endure the journey to the distant star system. The crew underwent rigorous training, their excitement tempered by the challenges ahead. Each member had their own reasons for joining the mission, some driven by the lure of discovery, others by personal ambition, and a few by a genuine belief in the significance of the quest. Aisha bonded with the team, her leadership a blend of calculated intellect and unwavering enthusiasm. Yet, in quiet moments, she couldn't shake the faint unease that crept into her thoughts whenever she reread the warning in the diary. She buried the feeling under layers of logic, convincing herself it was nothing more than a relic of superstition. As the day of the launch approached, the world watched with awe. News of the mission had sparked global interest, and Aisha found herself heralded as a pioneer. Standing before the spacecraft on the final morning, she took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on the sky. "This is it," she whispered, a mix of exhilaration and nerves coursing through her veins. The countdown began, and as the engines roared to life, the crew braced themselves. The ground trembled, and with a thunderous surge, the spacecraft lifted off, piercing the atmosphere and hurtling toward the unknown. Behind them, Earth faded into a distant speck, and ahead lay the promise and peril of discovery. The first few days in space were a mix of awe and monotony. The vastness of the universe stretched infinitely before them, stars shimmering like silent witnesses to their journey. The crew settled into routines, their excitement tempered by the weight of their mission. Dr. Aisha spent most of her time in the research lab, revisiting the signal's data and refining her theories about what awaited them. The encrypted patterns in the message seemed almost alive, shifting in ways she couldn't fully explain. It was as if the signal wanted to be understood, but was also hiding something. Tensions began to surface as the journey wore on. Long stretches of silence in the spacecraft amplified. Every small noise, every stray glance, and every whispered doubt. Arif, the lead engineer, voiced concerns about minor malfunctions in the ship's system's lights flickering in the corridors, a faint hum that seemed to come from nowhere. "It's just the ship adjusting to the conditions," Aisha reassured him, though her voice carried a tinge of uncertainty. One night, as the crew gathered in the common area for a meal, Zara, the mission's geologist, brought up the diary's ominous warning. "Do not awaken them," she quoted, her tone half joking but her eyes betraying unease. "What do you think it meant?" The room grew quiet. Aisha, determined to keep morale high, dismissed it with a confident smile. "Probably just an overactive imagination. We're scientists, not ghost hunters." But as they neared their destination, the atmosphere in the ship shifted. The signal grew stronger, its patterns more erratic, almost like a heartbeat. Strange occurrences became harder to ignore. Equipment that had worked perfectly during testing now malfunctioned inexplicably. Zara swore she saw movement in the observation deck, though the cameras showed nothing. Sleep became elusive for many, dreams filled with images they couldn't remember upon waking, but left them drenched in sweat. When the alien planet finally came into view, the entire crew gathered at the observation window. It was unlike anything they had imagined, a swirling mix of greens and purples, its surface dotted with jagged peaks and shimmering plains. "It's beautiful," someone whispered, but the beauty carried an undercurrent of menace. Aisha's heart raced as the spacecraft began its descent, the signal now pulsing with an intensity that felt almost alive. She told herself it was excitement she felt, not fear, as they prepared to step into the unknown. The spacecraft landed with a gentle thud, its shock absorbers absorbing the planet's uneven terrain. The crew peered out of the reinforced windows, their first glimpse of the alien world filling them with both awe and trepidation. The landscape stretched endlessly, an otherworldly mix of jagged crystalline formations and shifting mists that seemed to glow faintly under the pale, greenish sky. The ground itself appeared to pulsate ever so slightly, as if the planet were alive and breathing. Aisha led the team through the final checks before they disembarked. The air outside was toxic, requiring full environmental suits, but the temperature and pressure readings were surprisingly close to Earth's. "Everyone stay within visual range," she instructed, her voice steady despite the unease gnawing at her gut. "We're here to explore, not to get lost." As they stepped onto the surface, a strange stillness enveloped them. There was no wind, no rustling of leaves or distant echoes, only the sound of their boots crunching against the crystalline ground and the steady hum of their suits. The silence was oppressive, pressing against their ears like a tangible weight. Zara knelt to collect samples, marveling at the translucent, glowing rocks scattered around them. "These are unlike anything I've ever seen," she murmured, holding a shard up to the faint light. The team moved cautiously, their initial wonder giving way to an unspoken tension. Strange symbols etched into the crystalline structures caught their attention, each one intricate and foreign yet somehow familiar. "It looks like a language," muttered Arif, snapping photos and uploading them to the ship's database for analysis. But even as they recorded their findings, a growing sense of unease settled over them. Shadows seemed to shift in the corner of their vision, but when they turned, nothing was there. Hours later, they stumbled upon what appeared to be the remains of an ancient structure. It was massive, its jagged spires reaching toward the sky like skeletal fingers. The ground around it was littered with artifacts, broken devices, strange tools, and remnants of what could only be described as alien carvings. In the center of the ruin stood a pedestal, and atop it lay a pulsating crystal, glowing with an almost hypnotic light. Arif stepped forward, drawn to the crystal as if under a spell. "Be careful," Aisha warned, her voice sharp. But Arif, entranced, ignored her. He reached out and touched the crystal. The moment his fingers made contact, a deafening, otherworldly scream erupted, shattering the oppressive silence. The ground trembled violently, and the pulsating glow of the crystal spread outward in waves, lighting up the ruins like veins of fire. The crew staggered back, their suits vibrating with the force of the sound. Then, the shadows came alive. Figures began to emerge from the mists and the ruins twisted, amorphous shapes that defied comprehension. Their movements were jerky and unnatural, their presence exuding a malevolent intelligence. One by one, they turned toward the team, their intentions unmistakably hostile. "Run," Aisha shouted, snapping the team out of their frozen terror. They sprinted back toward the spacecraft, the creatures moving unnaturally fast, their forms flickering and shifting, as if they existed on the edge of reality. The air filled with an eerie, low hum that seemed to resonate inside their heads, growing louder with each passing second. As they reached the ship's perimeter, Aisha glanced back, her heart sinking. The creatures weren't just pursuing, they were spreading, their shadowy tendrils seeping into the crystalline ground, transforming it into something dark and unrecognizable. Whatever they had awakened, it wasn't just alive, it was hungry. The crew barely managed to seal the spacecraft's hatch before the creatures reached them. Their shadowy forms pressed against the outer hull, their unnatural shapes pulsating as if testing the barriers. Inside, the team was in chaos. Zara's hands trembled as she tried to run diagnostics on the ship's systems, while Arif, shaken and pale, muttered under his breath, "I didn't mean to. I didn't know." "Stop talking and focus," Aisha snapped, her voice sharp but laced with fear. She turned to the ship's captain, Ravi, who was frantically scanning the external environment. "What are we dealing with out there?" she asked. Ravi's face was ashen. "I don't know. They're not showing up on any of our sensors, they're just..." There he hesitated, then added, "The energy readings around the ship are spiking. It's like the whole planet is reacting to them." The hum outside grew louder, resonating through the spacecraft. The lights flickered, and the air grew thick, as if the creature's presence was seeping inside. "We need to leave," Zara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Now." Aisha hesitated. Leaving meant abandoning their mission and the chance to study the greatest discovery in human history, but staying meant certain death. Her mind raced as she considered their options. "Zara, get the ship ready for takeoff." "Ravi, monitor the external conditions. I'll try to isolate the signal's source, it might give us some answers." "You're still worried about the signal," Arif exploded, his voice cracking. "That thing is what brought them here. We need to get out of here before he could finish." The ship shuddered violently. The creatures had begun to penetrate the outer shell, their dark tendrils slithering through microscopic cracks. A strange, guttural sound filled the air, like a distorted whisper that grew louder and more insistent. Aisha rushed to the control panel, her fingers flying over the keys as she tried to pinpoint the signal's origin. Her heart sank as she realized it wasn't just coming from the crystal, it was emanating from the entire planet. The signal wasn't a message, it was a beacon, and they had activated it. "We've made a mistake," she whispered, her voice trembling. "This planet isn't just home to a lost civilization, it's a trap." As the words left her mouth, a sudden scream echoed through the ship. The team turned to see Zara convulsing, her face contorted in agony as a shadowy tendril pierced her suit. Her eyes locked with Aisha's for a brief, horrifying moment before her body collapsed, lifeless. The tendril retracted, and the shadow dissipated, leaving only silence. Aisha's breath caught in her throat. They weren't fighting creatures, they were fighting the planet itself. Every movement, every sound, every piece of the environment was connected, working in unison to eliminate them. "Everyone to the cockpit," she yelled. "We're leaving now." Ravi and Arif scrambled to their stations as the ship's engines roared to life. The ground beneath them began to quake, the crystalline formations collapsing into blackened voids. The creatures swarmed, their forms coalescing into massive, shifting structures that loomed over the ship. "Go, go, go," Aisha screamed as Ravi pulled the controls. The spacecraft lifted off, its engines straining against the planet's gravitational pull. Outside, the creatures lashed out, their tendrils reaching for the ship, dragging it back toward the ground. The ship lurched violently as one of the tendrils wrapped around its hull. Aisha gripped her chair, her mind racing for a solution. "Ravi, overload the thrusters," she shouted. "We have to break free." "It'll tear the ship apart," Ravi protested. "It doesn't matter." "Do it now," she yelled. With a reluctant nod, Ravi activated the emergency override. The engines roared with a deafening intensity, a burst of energy propelling the ship upward. The tendrils snapped, and the spacecraft shot into the atmosphere, leaving the cursed planet behind. As they breached the planet's gravitational field, the crew collapsed into their seats, gasping for air. The silence inside the ship was deafening, broken only by the soft hum of the engines. But Aisha's relief was short-lived. She turned to the console, her heart sinking as she saw the readings. The signal was still active. And worse, it was being transmitted not back to the planet, but outward, toward Earth. Aisha stared at the console, her hands trembling as the realization sank in. The signal wasn't just a cry for help or a warning, it was an invitation. Something on that planet, something ancient and malevolent, was reaching out across the stars, and now it was heading straight for Earth. "We have to stop it," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the ship. Ravi turned to her, his face etched with exhaustion and fear. "What do you mean? How can we stop something we don't even understand?" Aisha's mind raced. The crystal had been the focal point, the source of the beacon's activation. But the energy from the planet had latched onto their ship, amplifying the transmission. If they didn't find a way to sever the connection, the signal would continue to spread. "We need to destroy the ship," she said, her voice steadier now. Ravi froze. "Destroy the ship? Are you insane? We're barely holding on as it is. It's the only way," Aisha insisted. "The signal is using us as a conduit. If we don't stop it now, it will reach Earth. Do you understand what that means? This thing, it's not just some discovery, it's a plague." Arif, who had been sitting silently in the corner, suddenly stood up. "She's right," he said, his voice hollow. "I've seen what it can do. If this thing gets to Earth, there won't be anything left. No one left." Ravi clenched his fists, his knuckles white. "And what about us? What about surviving this mission? Do we just give up?" Aisha's gaze softened. "It's not giving up. It's making sure no one else suffers because of our mistakes." The ship shuddered again, a reminder of the lingering presence of the shadowy creatures they had left behind. Outside, the darkness of space seemed to press in closer, as if the void itself was aware of their actions. Time was running out. Ravi exhaled sharply and nodded, his face grim. "What's the plan?" Aisha moved quickly, pulling up the ship's systems on the console. "We'll set the core to overload. It will create an energy surge powerful enough to destroy the ship and disrupt the signal. We'll eject in the escape pod before it detonates." Arif hesitated. "But the escape pod's range, it won't get us far enough from the blast." Aisha met his eyes. "It's a risk we have to take." The crew worked in tense silence, rerouting power and setting the ship's systems to self-destruct. Every second felt like an eternity, the hum of the signal growing louder, almost like a heartbeat. The console blinked with warnings as the core began its countdown. 10 minutes to detonation. As they made their way to the escape pod, the ship's lights flickered violently. The signal's influence was growing stronger, its reach extending even into the ship's systems. "Hurry," Aisha urged, her voice tight with urgency. The three of them squeezed into the cramped pod, sealing the hatch behind them. Aisha activated the launch sequence, her heart pounding as the pod detached from the ship. They drifted away, the spacecraft looming in the viewport, its form dwarfed by the infinite expanse of space. The countdown reached its final seconds, and then, with a blinding flash, the ship exploded. The blast sent shockwaves rippling through space, the light momentarily illuminating the darkness. The pod shuddered violently, its occupants gripping their seats as the force of the explosion threatened to tear it apart. When the turbulence subsided, a heavy silence fell over them. Aisha stared out of the viewport, her eyes scanning the void. The ship was gone, and with it, the signal. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she allowed herself a sliver of hope. But that hope was short-lived. A faint pulse of light appeared in the distance, followed by another and another. The signal wasn't gone, it had fragmented, spreading like a virus. Aisha's chest tightened as she realized the horrifying truth. It wasn't just heading for Earth, it was heading for everywhere. The escape pod floated in silence, its systems flickering faintly as the three survivors sat in stunned disbelief. The signal was alive, relentless, and spreading like ripples in a pond. Ravi broke the silence, his voice shaking. That wasn't supposed to happen. The blast should have disrupted the source. Why is it still active? Aisha's hands trembled as she checked the pod's systems. "Because it's not tied to the ship or the crystal anymore," she said, her voice hollow. "We've unleashed something bigger than we understood. The signal has taken on a life of its own. It doesn't need a source anymore, it is the source." Arif leaned back, his face pale. "So what now? We're just stuck out here, drifting, waiting for what? For this thing to consume everything?" Aisha's mind raced, her scientific instincts battling with the crushing weight of their situation. There had to be a way. "The fragments," she murmured, almost to herself. "If it's fragmented, then maybe we can track the pieces. If we can warn Earth, warn anyone, it might buy us time for what?" Ravi snapped, his frustration boiling over. "We don't even know what this thing is. It's not just a signal, it's alive, it's intelligent. And it wants something." Aisha turned to him, her eyes blazing with determination. "Then we figure it out. We owe that much to everyone we've endangered. We don't just sit here and give up." The pod systems beeped weakly, indicating a faint energy reading nearby. Aisha's heart skipped a beat as she examined the data. "There's something out there," she said, pointing to the console. "A structure or a ship, something generating power." Ravi frowned. "You think it's connected to the signal?" "Maybe," Aisha said. "Or maybe it's something else entirely. Either way, it's our only chance." With no other options, the three survivors redirected the pod toward the source of the energy reading. The journey was tense, every moment filled with the oppressive weight of uncertainty. As they neared their destination, a massive, derelict structure came into view, an ancient alien vessel, half buried in the debris of an asteroid field. Its design was unlike anything they had ever seen, a twisted, jagged architecture that seemed to pulse faintly with an unnatural light. "What is that?" Arif whispered, his voice trembling. Aisha's eyes narrowed. "It's older than the ruins on the planet. This might be where the signal originated." As the pod docked with the alien vessel, the faint hum of the signal seemed to grow louder, resonating in their bones. The air inside the derelict was heavy, oppressive, as if the ship itself were watching them. The walls were lined with strange, glowing symbols that writhed and shifted like living. "This place is wrong," Ravi muttered, his hand gripping the edge of the console. "We shouldn't be here, we don't have a choice," Aisha said firmly, her resolve hardening. "If there's any hope of stopping this, it's here." They moved cautiously through the dark corridors, their flashlights casting long, flickering shadows. The deeper they went, the louder the signal became, its pulse now a constant, rhythmic thrum. Finally, they reached a massive chamber at the heart of the ship. In the center stood a towering, crystalline structure, glowing with an intense, pulsating light. "It's another beacon," Ayesha whispered, her voice a mix of awe and dread. "This is where it all began." As they approached, the light shifted, and a low, guttural sound filled the chamber. A voice deep, resonant, and ancient echoed in their minds, speaking in a language they couldn't understand yet somehow instinctively feared. The crystal seemed to pulse in time with the voice, each beat sending waves of unease through their bodies. Ayesha stepped forward, her mind racing. She could feel the intelligence behind the signal, its vast and alien mind probing her thoughts. "It's testing us," she said, her voice trembling. "It's trying to understand us." "And what happens when it does?" Arif asked, his voice barely audible. The voice grew louder, more insistent, and the symbols on the walls began to glow brighter. The ship shuddered violently, and the light from the crystal surged, filling the chamber with an otherworldly brilliance. Aisha's eyes widened as a horrifying truth became clear. "It doesn't just want to spread," she said, her voice breaking. "It wants to consume." Everything in the chamber exploded into chaos as the ship's systems came to life, the walls shifting and closing in around them. The three survivors ran, their only thought to escape, but the signal's presence was everywhere, its tendrils reaching for them. Aisha glanced back, her mind racing with a single desperate thought: if she couldn't destroy it, she had to find a way to contain it before it was too late. The ship's corridors warped around them, as if the vessel itself were alive, reshaping and trapping them within its labyrinth. The pulsating light of the crystalline beacon chased them, casting eerie shadows that seemed to stretch and reach for their very souls. Aisha's heart pounded in her chest as she led the group, her mind scrambling for a solution, for any way to fight back against this overwhelming force. "We can't outrun it," Ravi shouted, his voice laced with panic as another section of the corridor collapsed behind them. The walls seemed to pulse with the rhythm of the signal, vibrating with a malevolent energy that grew stronger with every passing second. "We're not trying to outrun it," Aisha yelled back, clutching the data tablet she'd snatched from the pod. "I need to get to the central console. There has to be a failsafe, something the original builders left behind." Arif stumbled, catching himself against the wall as the ground beneath them trembled. "You think they had a failsafe? Look at this place. Whatever this is, it's been running unchecked for who knows how long. We don't have another choice," Aisha snapped, dragging Arif to his feet. Her determination burned brighter than her fear, though her mind screamed at the impossibility of the task. She had to believe there was a way, a fragment of hope buried within this nightmare. The trio reached a massive chamber, dominated by an alien console that glowed faintly with symbols that shifted and rearranged like liquid. The console stood in stark contrast to the crystalline beacon. It was subdued, almost dormant, as if awaiting a command. The air in the chamber was oppressive, thick with the weight of the signal's presence. Aisha stepped forward, her hands trembling as she reached for the console. The symbols on its surface flared to life, the alien script twisting into patterns that her mind struggled to comprehend. But as she stared, something clicked: fragments of the signal's structure that she had studied, patterns she had decoded during her years of research. It wasn't just a language, it was an interface. "It's communicating," she whispered, her fingers hovering over the console. "Or it was. What are you waiting for?" Ravi urged, his voice frantic. "Do something." Aisha's hands moved instinctively, tracing the symbols and inputting commands. The console responded, its light intensifying as the ship trembled. The beacon's pulsating hum grew louder, almost deafening, as the signal seemed to sense their interference. A low, guttural roar echoed through the ship, the alien voice returning, this time sharper, angrier. "It knows what we're doing," Arif shouted, backing away as the walls of the chamber began to twist and contort. "I just need more time," Aisha said through gritted teeth, her focus unyielding. The console's symbols rearranged, forming what looked like a containment sequence. Her heart leaped. This was it. The builders of the ship had left a way to contain the signal, to trap it within the crystalline beacon and sever its connection to the outside universe. But the sequence required power, an immense amount of it, more than the ship's failing systems could provide. Aisha's stomach sank as she realized the cost. "The pod's energy core," she said, turning to the others. "It's the only source strong enough to activate this sequence. We have to bring it here." Ravi's face twisted in disbelief. "The pod? That's our only way off this death trap. If we don't do this, there won't be a universe to escape to." Aisha shot back. "We can make it work. We'll have to rig the core to transfer its energy and pray it doesn't kill us in the process." Before Ravi could argue further, the chamber trembled violently, and the beacon's light surged, spilling into the room. The roar of the signal grew deafening. The alien voice screaming in what felt like 1,000 overlapping tones. The signal was fighting back. "Go," Aisha screamed. "Get the core. I'll hold this sequence in place." Arif and Ravi hesitated for a fraction of a second before nodding and sprinting toward the pod. Aisha stayed behind, her hands flying across the console as she worked to stabilize the sequence. Sweat dripped down her face, and her vision blurred as the pressure in the room intensified. The beacon seemed to focus on her now, its pulsating light narrowing, as if it recognized her as the threat. Her mind was a whirlwind of fear and resolve. She couldn't let this thing win. Not here. Not ever. "Come on," she muttered, her fingers trembling as she fought against the alien system's complexity. "Give me something." Anything. The beacon roared again, and the chamber's walls began to close in. Aisha clenched her teeth, refusing to back down. "Not today," she hissed, her determination burning brighter than ever. Aisha's fingers raced across the alien console as the beacon's pulsating roar grew louder, almost drowning out her thoughts. The walls of the chamber seemed alive, twisting and shifting as if trying to crush her resolve. Sweat dripped down her face, her vision swimming, but she refused to stop. This was their only chance, humanity's only chance. Suddenly, the console emitted a sharp, piercing tone, and the shifting symbols solidified into a pattern she could recognize. The containment sequence was ready, but the power levels flashed red: insufficient energy. It was all up to Ravi and Arif now. Come on, Aisha whispered, her voice barely audible over the chaotic hum of the beacon. The console flickered, and a tendril of light shot out from the beacon, slamming into the chamber floor. Aisha stumbled back, watching in horror as the tendril began to reshape, forming a shadowy figure with shifting, amorphous limbs. The creature's form solidified, its glowing eyes locking onto her. It moved with an unsettling grace, each step sending ripples through the floor. Aisha's heart pounded as she backed away, searching for anything she could use to defend herself. But there was nothing, just her and the console, the only barrier between survival and oblivion. Before the creature could strike, a deafening crash echoed through the chamber. Ravi and Arif burst in, dragging the pod's energy core on a makeshift sled. "We got it," Ravi shouted, his voice strained from exertion. The core pulsed with a blue light, its energy levels dangerously unstable. "Over here," Aisha yelled, motioning toward the console. "We need to connect it now." The two men hauled the core to the console, their movements frantic as the creature advanced. Arif pulled out a set of tools, his hands shaking as he worked to jury-rig the core into the alien system. Sparks flew, and the core emitted a high-pitched whine, its energy output surging. Hurry, Aisha urged, glancing back at the creature. It was mere steps away now, its glowing eyes narrowing, as if sensing their plan. "I'm trying," Arif snapped, sweat pouring down his face. He twisted a final wire into place, and the core flared to life, its energy coursing through the console. The symbols on the alien interface lit up in rapid succession, the containment sequence activating. The beacon screamed, its light pulsating wildly as the containment field began to form. The chamber trembled violently, and the creature let out a guttural roar, its form dissolving into tendrils of light that were sucked back into the beacon. The walls of the ship shifted, the oppressive hum of the signal fading as the containment field took hold. "It's working," Aisha shouted, her voice triumphant. But the core began to overheat, its blue light turning a fiery red. Arif's eyes widened. The core's unstable. It's going to blow. Aisha's mind raced. If the core detonated, it could destroy the containment field and release the signal again. "We need to eject the core," she said. Ravi shook his head. "If we do, the containment sequence will fail. We don't have a choice." Aisha shouted. "If it blows, we all die, and so does any chance of stopping this thing." With no time to argue, Arif activated the ejection mechanism. The core detached from the console, and the sled's automated systems dragged it toward an emergency airlock. The containment field wavered but held, its energy now sustained by the alien ship's backup power systems. The core launched into the void of space just as it exploded, the shockwave rippling through the ship. The trio was thrown to the ground, the chamber shaking violently as debris rained down around them. Aisha covered her head, her ears ringing from the blast. When the tremors subsided, an eerie silence filled the chamber. The beacon's light had dimmed, its pulsating energy now confined within the containment field. The alien symbols on the walls faded, leaving only faint traces of their glow. Aisha pushed herself to her feet, her body trembling with exhaustion. "Is it?" Ravi asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Aisha looked at the beacon, now dormant and silent. "For now," she said, her voice heavy with both relief and lingering dread. "But we need to make sure it stays that way." As they made their way back to the pod, battered and bruised, Aisha couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. The signal was contained, but its fragments were still out there, waiting, watching. And deep in her heart, she knew this was only the beginning. The escape pod drifted silently through the void, its systems barely holding together after the chaos. Aisha, Ravi, and Arif sat in exhausted silence, their faces pale and drawn. The faint hum of the pod's engines was the only sound, a fragile reminder that they had survived for now. Aisha stared out of the viewport, her mind racing despite her exhaustion. The beacon was contained, but the signal fragments were still spreading through the cosmos. Every pulse of light, every ripple in the vast darkness, felt like a harbinger of the horrors yet to come. She couldn't shake the feeling that the alien intelligence wasn't defeated, it was merely regrouping. Ravi broke the silence, his voice heavy. "What do we do now? We've got limited supplies, barely enough power, and no way to contact Earth." Aisha tore her gaze from the viewport and looked at him. "First, we survive. We send out a distress signal and hope someone finds us before it's too late. But more importantly, we warn them. Earth needs to know what's out here." And then what? Arif asked, his voice hollow. "Even if we warn them, even if they believe us, what can anyone do? This thing, whatever it is, it's beyond us. Beyond anything we've ever imagined." Aisha's jaw tightened. "Then we fight. We figure out how to contain the fragments, how to stop the signal from spreading. If we don't, it's only a matter of time before it reaches Earth. And when it does, it won't stop." Ravi let out a bitter laugh. "You talk like we're heroes in some kind of story. Look at us, we're barely alive, floating in a tin can in the middle of nowhere. What makes you think we have any chance against something like this?" Aisha met his gaze, her eyes steely despite the fear that gnawed at her. "Because we have to. If we don't, no one else will." The pod's control panel beeped weakly, drawing their attention. Aisha leaned forward, her heart skipping a beat as she saw the faint outline of a signal on the radar. "There's something out there," she said, her voice sharp. Ravi frowned, leaning closer. "Another ship maybe," Aisha said, though her gut told her otherwise. The signal was faint but distinct, a rhythmic pulse that sent a chill down her spine. It wasn't a distress call, it was something else. Arif stared at the radar, his face pale. That pattern. It looks familiar, Aisha's breath caught. It was familiar, too familiar. The signal was similar to the one they had intercepted years ago, the one that had led them to this nightmare. But it was different, fragmented, as if it were trying to rebuild itself. No, she whispered, her chest tightening. It can't be. The pod shuddered, a faint vibration that grew stronger with each passing second. The lights flickered, and the air grew heavy, oppressive. The hum of the signal seeped into the pod, resonating in their bones. It's here, Arif said, his voice trembling. It followed us, Aisha's mind raced. The containment field on the alien ship had held the beacon, but it hadn't stopped the fragments from spreading. The signal had latched onto them, using their escape as a bridge to continue its expansion. We have to stop it, she said, her voice firm, despite the rising panic in her chest. We can't let it spread any further. Ravi shook his head. How? We don't have the tools, the power, nothing. Aisha's eyes narrowed. We have one thing, us. If we can isolate the signal, draw it into the pod, we can use what's left of our systems to overload it. It might not destroy it completely, but it could disrupt its transmission. That's suicide, Arif said, his voice cracking. If we do that, we won't survive. Aisha looked at him, her expression resolute. If we don't, no one will. The three exchanged glances, the weight of the decision settling over them like a shroud. Finally, Ravi nodded, his jaw clenched. Let's do it working together. They rerouted the pod's remaining power to amplify the signal, creating a feedback loop designed to overload its frequency. The hum grew louder, almost deafening, as the signal's presence filled the pod. The walls vibrated, and the lights flickered wildly. Aisha's hands trembled as she activated the final sequence. Brace yourselves, she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. The pod erupted in a blinding flash of light, the signal's energy colliding with their makeshift disruptor. The force of the explosion sent the pod spiraling, its systems failing one by one. Aisha felt the heat, the pull of the void, and then darkness. When she opened her eyes, the hum was gone. The signal was silent, but the pod was adrift, its power completely drained. Aisha looked around, her vision blurry. Ravi and Arif were unconscious but breathing. The void stretched endlessly around them, silent and indifferent. They had stopped it, at least for now. But as Aisha stared into the abyss, she knew the fight was far from over. The fragments were still out there, waiting, biding their time. And so was she. Aisha's head throbbed as she forced her eyes open, the silence inside the pod almost as deafening as the chaos that had preceded it. The faint flicker of emergency lights cast a dim glow over the cramped space. She winced as she sat up, every muscle in her body protesting. Her gaze fell on Ravi and Arif, slumped against their seats but alive. She let out a shaky breath, relief mingling with exhaustion. The pod drifted aimlessly, its systems utterly drained. Aisha reached for the console, her fingers trembling as she tapped at the unresponsive controls. The screen remained dark, save for a faint, flickering error message. They were adrift, lost in the void. Ravi. Arif, Aisha croaked, her voice barely audible. She shook them gently, her heart pounding as seconds stretched into what felt like hours. Finally, Ravi groaned, his eyes fluttering open. What happened? He mumbled, his voice thick with confusion. We did it, Aisha said, her voice steady despite the gnawing dread that clung to her thoughts. We overloaded the signal. It's gone for now. Arif stirred next, his face pale and drawn. For now, he asked, his voice hoarse. You mean? It's not over. Aisha shook her head. The fragments are still out there. We disrupted one, but there could be countless more. This was just the beginning. Ravi let out a bitter laugh, the sound hollow in the quiet pod. So we're heroes who saved the universe, and no one will ever know because we're going to die out here. Aisha's jaw tightened. We're not dead yet. She forced herself to her feet, her movements slow and deliberate as she searched the pod for anything that could help. Supplies were sparse ration packs, an oxygen filter barely hanging on, and a single emergency beacon with limited range. She activated the beacon, its faint signal blinking on the console. This will send out a distress call, she said. It's not much, but it's all we've got. And if no one finds us, Arif asked, his tone bleak. Aisha turned to him, her eyes fierce. Then we keep fighting. We're still alive, and as long as we're alive, we have a chance. That's more than most people would get after facing what we just did. The three of them settled into an uneasy silence, the weight of their situation pressing down on them. The pod drifted through the void, its beacon a tiny spark in an endless sea of darkness. Hours turned into days, each moment stretching endlessly as they rationed supplies and took turns monitoring the beacon's faint signal. Aisha spent most of her time staring out of the viewport, her thoughts swirling. She replayed every detail of the mission in her mind, searching for clues, for answers to the questions that haunted her. Who had built the beacon? What was the signal's true purpose? And most importantly, how could it be stopped for good? Her thoughts were interrupted one day by a faint beep from the console. She froze, her heart leaping into her throat. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice tight with hope. Ravi and Arif scrambled to the console as the faint signal grew stronger. Aisha tapped at the controls, the screen flickering to life with a weak transmission. The image was distorted, but she could make out the outline of a ship. "It's a rescue vessel," she said, her voice trembling. They found as relief washed over them as the vessel drew closer, its docking clamps latching onto the pod. The airlock hissed open, and a team of rescuers entered, their expressions a mix of curiosity and concern. "You're lucky we picked up your beacon," one of them said, helping Aisha to her feet. "We almost missed it." Thank you so much for watching this video. I truly appreciate your time and attention. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more exciting content. Your support means the world to me and helps me create even more amazing videos for you. Stay tuned, and I'll see you in the next one.